Danny vanished walking home. Only his backpack was found by the river. A buried discovery reopens the cold case. His mother follows a trail of dark secrets where the truth is deeper than the water. Subscribe before the final shocking truth surfaces. October 12th, 1999. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The kind of afternoon where the sky hung low, heavy with the promise of rain. The school bell had rung at 3:15 p.m., releasing a flood of children into the crisp autumn air. Among them was 8-year-old Danny Whitmore, his small frame swallowed by the oversized blue backpack he insisted on carrying himself. He took the same route every day, down Elmwood Avenue, past the old hardware store with its rusted sign, across the narrow footbridge that spanned the slow-moving river, and then left onto Sycamore Lane, where his house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac. A 10-minute walk, no more. His mother Claire had drilled it into him. Don't talk to strangers. Don't stop for anyone. Come straight home. Mrs. Langley, the elderly woman who sat on her porch every afternoon with her terrier, remembered seeing him pass by, kicking a pebble along the sidewalk. The cashier at the corner store recalled a boy matching Danny's description buying a pack of gum around 3:30. After that, nothing. No screams, no struggle, no sign of disturbance, just silence. It wasn't until 4:45 that Claire's phone rang. It was Mrs. Peterson from down the street, her voice tight with concern. "Danny didn't show up for our boys' study group. Is he sick today?" Claire's stomach dropped. She called the school first, her fingers trembling as she dialed, praying there had been a mistake. Maybe detention. Maybe he'd stayed late for an activity she'd forgotten about. But the secretary confirmed what she already knew. Danny had left at the usual time. By 5:30, the police were involved. Officers fanned out along Danny's route, knocking on doors, peering into backyards, their flashlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Neighbors joined the search, their voices calling his name into the thickening night, the word Danny echoing back at them, unanswered. Then at 7:02 p.m., Officer Reynolds radioed in. "We found something." Danny's backpack lay on the riverbank, half submerged in the reeds, the zipper gaping open like a wound. Inside were his notebooks, his lunchbox, still holding the untouched apple Claire had packed that morning, and a single gray sneaker caked in mud. Claire collapsed when she saw it. The next few days were a blur of frantic energy and crushing despair. Missing posters plastered every lamppost, every store window, Danny's smiling school photo staring out at a town that had failed him. The police dredged the river, searched nearby woods, interviewed every registered sex offender within a 20-mile radius. Nothing. And then, as weeks turned to months, the leads dried up. The news crews moved on to the next tragedy. The posters faded, their edges curling in the wind. But Claire never stopped looking. Every year, on October 12th, she retraced Danny's steps, her fingers brushing the places he had last been seen, as if the ghost of his presence might whisper an answer. Until 17 years later, a construction crew broke ground on a new housing development near the river and found something buried beneath the dirt, something that should have stayed hidden. The call came in the middle of the night. Claire's phone buzzed violently against the nightstand, the screen casting a sickly blue glow across her face. She fumbled for it, her heart already pounding. No one called at 2:17 a.m., unless it was bad, unless it was him. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, clipped. "Official. This is Detective Holloway with the cold case unit. We need you to come down to the station." Her throat tightened. "Why?" A pause. "Too long. We found something." What school police station hadn't changed in 17 years. The same flickering fluorescent lights, the same stale coffee smell, the same worn-out chairs in the waiting area where Claire had sat for hours, days, years, begging for answers. Detective Holloway was younger than she expected, early 40s, with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He led her to a small, windowless room where a cardboard evidence box sat on the table between them. "Construction crew was digging near the old river bend," he said, his voice carefully neutral, about half a mile from where Danny's backpack was found. Claire's fingers dug into her knees. He opened the box. Inside was a child's shoe, not just any shoe, a gray sneaker, its laces frayed, the rubber sole nearly disintegrated from years underground. But the logo was still visible, the same one she had bought Danny for 3rd grade, the same one that had gone missing with him. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. That's his." Holloway nodded. "Forensics confirmed it, and there's more." He slid a photograph across the table. The image was grainy, taken from some kind of surveillance footage. A figure, tall, hooded, walking near the riverbank. The timestamp in the corner read 10/12/99, 3:42 p.m. This was pulled from an old gas station camera, a block from the footbridge, Holloway said. We missed it back then. The angle was wrong. The footage was stored in a box that got misplaced, but we found it last week. Claire's hands shook as she stared at the photo. The figure wasn't looking at the camera. They were turned slightly, as if watching something or someone, just out of frame. Danny, Holloway hesitated. We don't know, but we think this person might have seen what happened. A witness. A witness. Over all these years, a witness. Claire's mind raced. If this person had seen Danny, if they knew something, why had they never come forward? Were they afraid? Guilty? Or had they been hiding something far worse? What now? She asked, her voice raw. Holloway exhaled. Now we find them. New buildings had gone up. Old ones had been torn down. People had moved away, died, forgotten. But some things never changed. The river still flowed, dark and slow. The footbridge still creaked underfoot. And someone, somewhere, still knew the truth. Claire stood on the riverbank, staring at the spot where Danny's backpack had been found all those years ago. The police had searched the area 100 times. They'd dragged the river, combed the woods, followed every lead. But they'd missed the shoe. They'd missed the footage. What else had they missed? The rustling in the bushes made her turn. A man stood a few feet away, watching her. Old, wiry. His face was lined with years of hard living, his clothes worn thin. Claire's breath caught. She knew him. Ronnie Driscoll. A drifter who'd been in and out of jail for petty crimes, theft, public intoxication. He'd been questioned after Danny's disappearance, but he'd had an alibi, or so they'd thought. Now, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. You're his mother, he said. Not a question. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. You remember me. Ronnie glanced at the river, then back at her. I remember a lot of things. A beat of silence. Then, I saw him that day. Claire's world tilted. What? Ronnie's voice dropped, his eyes darting around as if afraid someone might overhear. The kid, your boy, I saw him by the bridge. Her knees threatened to buckle. With who? Ronnie hesitated. Then, just as quickly, he shook his head. Ain't safe to talk here. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Claire stood frozen, her heart hammering. After 17 years of silence, a witness, a lie. She didn't know, but she was going to find out. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, Ronnie Driscoll's words echoing in her skull like a struck bell. I saw him that day. Over and over, the same 4 words, twisting into new shapes each time. A confession? A taunt? Or just the ramblings of an old drunk looking for attention? She should have called Holloway immediately, but something stopped her. Ronnie had been afraid. Not of her. Of someone else. The next morning, she drove to the outskirts of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel, and the trees grew thick and untamed. Ronnie's last known address was a rusted trailer at the end of a dirt path, half hidden by overgrown weeds. She knocked. No answer. The door creaked open under her touch, unlocked. Inside, the trailer smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. Empty beer cans littered the floor. A single mattress, stained and sagging, sat in the corner. No Ronnie, but on the rickety table near the window, something caught her eye. A photograph. Faded. Water-stained. She picked it up, her breath hitching. It was the river, the footbridge, and standing near the edge, barely visible in the grainy image, a child in a blue backpack. Danny. Her hands trembled. The photo wasn't from the gas station footage. This was different. Closer. Someone had been there. Someone had taken this. A floorboard creaked behind her. Claire spun around. Ronnie stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. You shouldn't be here, he muttered, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. Claire held up the photo. Where did you get this? He hesitated, then sighed. Took it myself. Her stomach dropped. You were there. Ronnie rubbed his stubbled jaw, avoiding her eyes. Yeah, I was. And you never told the police? Her voice cracked. Couldn't? He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow. Because they'd have asked what else I saw. The police of Lycol de Tijuca. Air left Claire's lungs. Who took him, Ronnie? A long silence. Then, not who. Ronnie's voice dropped to a whisper. What? Claire stared at him. What the hell does that mean? Ronnie grabbed a beer can, crushed it in his fist. You ever hear things about that river? Old stories? She had. Everyone had. The town's darkest legend. The grinning man, a figure said to lurk near the water, beckoning children with whispers only they could hear. A folktale, nothing more. Something parents used to scare kids away from the riverbanks at night. Claire's skin prickled. You're not seriously saying I ain't saying nothing. Ronnie tossed the can aside. but that day I saw your boy stop dead in the middle of that bridge, like he heard something. Then he just walked toward the trees. Didn't look scared, didn't look forced, just gone. Claire's vision swam. You're lying. Wish I was. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small rusted key, found this where he vanished. Figured it might matter someday. She took it. The metal was ice cold. What does it open? Ronnie's smile was grim. That's the question, ain't it? Claire, Ronnie Driscoll's a known alcoholic with a record longer than my arm, he said, rubbing his temples. You really think some ghost story's gonna crack this case? She slammed the key onto his desk. Then explain this. Holloway picked it up, frowning. Could be anything. A locker, a diary, hell, a wind-up toy. Or it could be something, she snapped. Something you missed. A tense silence. Then Holloway sighed. Fine, we'll run it. But Claire, he met her eyes. Don't go chasing shadows. Not after all this time. Too late. She was already running toward them. The Stone Library's archives were a time capsule of yellowed newspapers and crumbling ledgers. Claire spent hours scouring them, searching for any mention of the grinning man, the river, disappearances. The details were eerily familiar. A backpack found by the water. No signs of struggle. No body. And in the grainy photo accompanying the article, the same footbridge. Her hands shook as she flipped to the next page. Another article. 1954. Another child. Another disappearance. All near the river. All unsolved. Her breath came fast as she dug deeper, pulling records, maps, anything that might connect them. Then a hand landed on her shoulder. She jumped. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled down at her. Find what you're looking for? Claire hesitated. Then, has anyone else researched this? The disappearances? The woman's smile faded. A man came in last week, asked the same questions. Who? Didn't catch his name. But he left this. She slid a scrap of paper across the table. A single word scrawled in hurried handwriting. Look under the bridge. Claire's blood turned to ice. Someone else knew. Someone else was looking. And they wanted her to find something. The librarian's words hung in the air like cobwebs. Look under the bridge. The scrap of paper felt like burning coal in Claire's hand. Who had left it? Ronnie? The hooded figure from the gas station footage? Or someone else entirely, watching her every move from the shadows? Paranoia, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. She drove to the river, the afternoon sun casting long skeletal shadows across the water. The footbridge loomed ahead, its weathered wood groaning softly in the breeze. It felt different now, not just a crossing point, but a threshold, a place where children vanished, and whispers became flesh. The space beneath the bridge was a tangle of damp shadows, thick with the smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. Mud sucked at her boots as she crouched low, sweeping the beam of her flashlight through the gloom. Spiderwebs clung to her hair, rusted beer cans, discarded fishing line, the skeletal remains of a small animal. The detritus of decades littered the bank. What am I even looking for? Then the light caught it. Not buried, but wedged deep into a crevice where the bridge's concrete support met the eroded earth. A small metal lockbox. Old, battered, coated in a thick layer of slimy river mud and rust. It looked like it had been there for years, maybe decades. Forgotten. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. The key Ronnie gave her felt suddenly heavy in her pocket. Ice-cold metal against her trembling fingers. It slid into the lock with surprising ease. A soft grating click echoed unnaturally loud in the confined space. The hinges screamed in protest as she pried the lid open. Inside, protected from the worst of the elements by the box's tight seal, lay two objects. One dotting Warnoy, a photograph, older than Danny's disappearance, much older, black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a group of children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing formally in front of what was unmistakably the same footbridge, though it looked newer, less worn. They wore clothes from another era, knickerbockers, pinafores, serious expressions, but one face in the back row was violently scratched out, obliterated by deep, angry gouges that had torn through the paper. Not just crossed out, but erased with furious intent. The obliteration felt personal, hateful, too. A cassette tape, an old standard audio cassette, encased in a clear plastic shell. A single word was written on a peeling label in faded, spidery handwriting. Listen. Claire's breath hitched. The photograph was chilling, a tangible piece of the past screaming its silent horror. But the tape promised voices, a direct line to the darkness. And she shoved both items deep into her coat pocket, slammed the box shut, and scrambled out from under the bridge, her skin crawling as if 1,000 unseen eyes watched her retreat. Back home, the familiar walls felt suffocating. The cassette tape sat on her kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. Her old stereo system, untouched for years, gathered dust in the living room. Did it even still work? The thought of hearing whatever was on that tape filled her with a dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. What if it's Danny? What if it's his voice? What if it's Detective Holloway's warning echoed? Don't go chasing shadows. But the shadows had reached out and grabbed her. She had to know. With shaking hands, she blew dust off the stereo, plugged it in and slotted the cassette into the deck. The ancient mechanisms whirred and clicked, a sound that instantly transported her back to Danny's childhood, listening to story tapes. The memory was a physical blow. She pressed play. Static hissed, thick and white, filling the room. Then cutting through the noise, a sound that froze her blood. Laughter, but not joyful laughter. It was high-pitched, unnatural, almost metallic, a child's giggle twisted into something manic, unsettling. It echoed, overlapped with itself, creating a dissonant chorus that made the hairs on her neck stand rigid. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds, fading back into static. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Claire's knuckles were white on the edge of the table. Then, a voice, a man's voice, low, rasping, muffled as if speaking through thick fabric or from a distance. It was impossible to discern age or accent clearly, distorted by time and poor recording. But the words were clear enough. The grinning man walks. He calls. They always listen. The river remembers, always remembers, always remembers. A sharp intake of breath, almost a sob, cut off abruptly. Then the voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, dripping with a chilling certainty. He took the boy, like the others. He walks among you still. Then abruptly, the tape ended with a final decisive click. Claire sat frozen in the sudden silence, the rasping voice and the twisted laughter reverberating in her skull. He took the boy, like the others. He walks among you still. It wasn't just folklore. Someone believed it. Someone knew it. And they had recorded this confession, this warning, this taunt. Panic warred with a furious burning need. She grabbed her phone, fingers fumbling, ready to call Holloway, to scream the words down the line. I have proof. Proof it wasn't random. Proof it's connected. But she stopped. The voice on the tape, that low, rasping whisper, it hadn't sounded afraid. It had sounded satisfied, proud even. And the laughter, that wasn't fear.
That was delight. What if the person who left the note under the bridge was the grinning man, or his accomplice? What if this tape was a trap, a way to lure her or the police deeper into his game, to show them how close he'd been all along? And in the photograph, the child whose face was violently erased, was that the grinning man as a boy, a victim, a warning? Claire ejected the cassette, her hands trembling violently. She couldn't give this to Holloway, not yet, not until she understood. The police would dismiss it, a hoax, a sick joke by Ronnie or some other deranged local. They wouldn't see the pattern, the ritual in it. They wouldn't feel the ancient, predatory chill that seeped from that recording. She hid the cassette tape and the mutilated photograph inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf, a relic from her college days. The lockbox and key she buried deep in her backyard garden shed, beneath bags of peat moss. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house was the footbridge groaning. Every rustle of leaves outside was the rasping voice from the tape. He walks among you still. The face scratched out of the photograph swam behind her closed eyelids. Was he out there now, watching her house? Had he watched her retrieve his box? She paced the dark living room, drawn to the window overlooking the quiet street. Moonlight silvered the pavement. Nothing moved. Or did it? Was that a deeper shadow lingering near the old oak tree across the way? A trick of the light? Her frayed nerves? She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, exhaustion warring with terror. 17 years of searching, of grief, had narrowed to this suffocating point. A voice on a tape, a defaced photo, and the crushing certainty that the evil that took Danny wasn't a fleeting act of violence. It was patient. The silence outside felt less like emptiness and more like a held breath.
The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it felt like a presence, watching, waiting, grinning. She jumped as the phone rang, shattering the oppressive quiet. The digital clock on the microwave glowed 3:42 a.m., the exact timestamp from the gas station footage. Her hand hovered over the receiver, icy dread flooding her veins. Who would call at this hour? Holloway? Ronnie? Or... She lifted the receiver slowly, her voice a dry croak. "Hello?" Static hissed on the line. Thick white noise just like the tape. Then faintly, almost swallowed by the distortion, came a sound that stopped her heart. A child's voice, impossibly distant, whispering a single word she couldn't quite make out. Before she could react, the line went dead. Claire stood frozen in the moonlit silence, the static still echoing in her ears, the ghost of that whisper clinging to her skin. The game had changed. The grinning man wasn't just in the past, or under the bridge. He was on the phone. The dial tone droned in Claire's ear, a flat, mocking counterpoint to the phantom static still crackling in her skull. She lowered the receiver slowly, her hand trembling violently. The digital clock's glow, 3:42, seemed accusatory, a malevolent wink from the darkness. That whisper, it hadn't been Danny. The cadence was wrong, the tone flatter, devoid of his particular lilt. Yet it was a child. The realization was a fresh spike of ice in her chest. Who else? Sleep was impossible. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was charged, expectant. Every shadow pooled deeper. Every creak of settling timber sounded like approaching footsteps on the bridge. She paced, her mind a maelstrom of the rasping voice on the tape, the obliterated face in the photograph, Ronnie's haunted eyes, and now this spectral whisper on the line. The grinning man wasn't just a story. He was a predator who left calling cards, a key, a box, a tape, a phone call. He was playing with her. Dawn arrived, gray and unwelcome, doing little to dispel the chill clinging to her bones. She needed answers the police wouldn't chase. She needed to understand the face that had been erased. The library archives felt different in the pale morning light, less a repository of knowledge, more a tomb of forgotten tragedies. She ignored the librarian's concerned look and returned to the brittle newspapers. She wasn't looking for disappearances now. She was hunting the key to obliterated. Methodically, she worked backwards from the 1972 article about the vanished boy. Year by year, page by crumbling page. Local news, school reports, community bulletins, anything that might feature group photos of children near the river or the bridge. Her fingers grew grimy with newsprint dust. Her eyes gritty and strained. Hours bled away. Frustration gnawed at her. Then, tucked inside a bound volume of the Sycamore Sentinel from 1963, she found it. Not a front-page story, but a small, unassuming piece near the back. Sycamore Lane Elementary Class of 58 5-year reunion picnic. The accompanying photograph was a grainy halftone. Adults laughing, holding paper plates, clustered near picnic tables by the riverbank. In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, stood the footbridge, and grouped near its entrance, looking stiff and formal in their slightly too big reunion attire, were the children who would have been part of that class a decade prior. Teenagers now, mostly. Claire's breath caught. She leaned closer, pulling a magnifying glass from her bag. The faces were small, indistinct, but there, in the back row, a boy, taller than the others, with dark, unruly hair falling over his forehead. His expression was odd, not smiling like most, not frowning, just blank, intensely focused on something outside the frame, something towards the river. And beside him, slightly overlapping his shoulder, was another boy, or rather where another boy should have been. The photo was damaged, not scratched like the one from the lockbox, but torn, a jagged rip precisely where the second boy's face would have been, leaving only a sliver of a striped shirt collar and a blurry suggestion of an ear. It wasn't identical to the lockbox photo, but the echo was terrifying. Erasure, removal, a deliberate act to make someone disappear from the record. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 5 years after their elementary graduation, the reunion. Who was the boy with the dark, intense eyes? Who was torn away beside him? She scanned the caption below the photo, squinting at the faded names listed beneath. James Peterson, Martha Henley, Robert Vance, Susan Davies. The list stopped before it reached the back row. Frustration flared. She carefully lifted the brittle page, hoping for a continuation on the reverse.
Nothing. Just the continuation of the article about potato salad contests and raffle winners. Find something interesting. Claire jumped, nearly knocking the heavy volume off the table. The elderly librarian stood beside her, her expression unreadable. Just local history, Claire managed, her voice tight. This reunion photo, do you have any yearbooks? From Sycamore Lane Elementary, around 1958. The librarian's eyes flickered to the torn photograph, then back to Claire's face. A shadow passed over her features. The 58 yearbook, she murmured, her voice dropping. There was a fire in the storage annex years back. Lost a lot of the older volumes. That one, I believe it was among them. She paused, her gaze lingering on the ripped face in the newspaper photo. Such a shame. That was a difficult year for that class. Claire's senses prickled. Difficult? How? The librarian glanced around, though the archives were deserted. She lowered her voice further, leaning in conspiratorially. Oh, you know how children can be cliques. Cruelty. There was an incident by the river. Not long after that picture was taken, actually. A boy was badly hurt. Fell from the bridge, they said. She shook her head, a flicker of old sorrow in her eyes. Terrible accident. He never quite recovered, mentally or physically. His family moved away not long after. Changed their name, I heard. Wanted a fresh start, away from the whispers. Whispers. Claire pressed, her mouth dry. What whispers? The librarian straightened up, her professional mask slipping back into place, but not before Claire saw the unease. Just children's talk. Nasty rumors. Blaming another boy in the class. Saying he pushed him. Awful things. No proof, of course. Just playground malice that took on a life of its own. The accused boy, he vanished too, eventually. Ran away. People assumed. Troubled soul. She gestured dismissively at the newspaper. That reunion, it was an attempt at healing, I suppose. But some wounds never really close, do they? She walked away, leaving Claire alone with the brittle paper and the roaring silence in her head. An incident. A fall. Accusations. A boy blamed. A boy vanished. Troubled soul. The pieces crashed together with dizzying force. The lockbox photo. Children by the bridge. One face violently scratched out. This reunion photo. Teenagers by the bridge. One face torn away. A victim. Was the grinning man not some ancient spirit, but a man? A boy twisted by an accident and accusations. A boy who vanished, only to return decade
Later, stealing other children near the same bridge, taking them like he was accused of taking that first boy, a cycle of violence born on that weathered wood. Her thoughts flew to Ronnie, his fear. I ain't safe to talk here. He knew names, he knew faces, he'd been around forever. He was the thread. She slammed the volume shut, the sound echoing in the quiet archive. She had to find Ronnie. Now his trailer felt even more desolate in the harsh afternoon light. The unlocked door swung open to the same stale emptiness. No Ronnie, but this time there was a difference. On the rickety table, beside the empty beer cans, lay a single object that hadn't been there before, Danny's other sneaker. Not old and mud-caked like the one found by the construction crew. This one was relatively clean, unnervingly preserved. The blue stitching on the side was still vivid. It looked like it had been placed there moments ago. And tucked into the laces, knotted tight, was a small folded piece of paper. Claire's blood turned to sludge. She approached slowly, her breath shallow. She pulled the paper free, her fingers numb. Unfolding it, she recognized the same hurried, spidery handwriting from the library note. Stop digging. He sees you. Below it a crude, childlike drawing, a simple bridge, and beneath it a wide crescent moon smile, a grin. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a receipt. Proof the grinning man knew she'd found the lockbox. Proof he knew she'd been to the library. Proof he'd been here, in Ronnie's trailer. And Ronnie was gone. Claire stumbled back out into the daylight, Danny's sneaker clutched in one hand, the note in the other. The familiar streets of her town, bathed in afternoon sun, seemed suddenly alien, suffused with a watchful malevolence. The river wasn't just water, it was a dark, flowing witness. The bridge wasn't just wood, it was an altar. The grinning man wasn't a legend, he was real, he was here, and he had just left his calling card on Ronnie Driscoll's table. The only witness was silenced. The only thread was cut. He saw her, and he wasn't grinning from the shadows anymore. He was walking beside her, breathing the same air, leaving his trophies in the light. The game had entered a terrifying new phase. The hunter wasn't just hunting children anymore. He was hunting her. The stench of the river clung to Ronnie Driscoll. They pulled him out near dawn, a quarter-mile downstream from the footbridge. His body snagged on a submerged log, bloated and pale in the harsh glare of the police spotlights. Claire watched from the cordon tape, hollowed out by a cold fury that burned deeper than grief. She hadn't called Holloway after finding Danny's sneaker and the grinning note. She'd known with a sickening certainty what that message meant. Ronnie wasn't hiding. Ronnie was gone. Now seeing his waterlogged form zipped into the black bag, the confirmation was a physical blow, not an accident, not a drunk stumbling into the water. The timing was too precise, the message too clear. Humtui sees you, and Ronnie had seen too much. Holloway approached her, his face grim under the flashing lights. Mud streaked his trousers. He looked older, the weight of this reopened wound pressing down hard. "Claire," he said, his voice rough, "you shouldn't be here. Where else would I be?" Her voice was flat, numb. She kept seeing the crude grin drawn on the note. Did he drown? Holloway hesitated, glancing back at the coroner's van. Preliminary says water in the lungs, but he lowered his voice. He had a hell of a contusion on the back of his head. Significant. Someone hit him, Claire stated. It wasn't a question. Looks that way. Then dumped him in the river. Holloway scrubbed a hand over his face. You talked to him recently. What did he say? Anything concrete? For he said the grinning man took your son. He said he saw Danny walk away like he was listening to something. The words died on her tongue. Holloway wouldn't hear it. He'd see a dead drunk, a convenient suspect silenced. He wouldn't see the pattern, the ritual, the ancient fear whispering from a rusted lockbox. He was scared, she said instead. Said it wasn't safe to talk. He hinted he knew something about Danny. Holloway's gaze sharpened. Hinted or said? He implied, Claire insisted, the frustration bubbling up. He had a photo of the bridge from that day. She left out the lockbox, the tape, the 3:42 a.m. call. Her evidence was tainted now, tangled in the very folklore that made it unbelievable. Ronnie's death poisoned it all. Did he give you this photo? Holloway pressed. No, I saw it at his place. Before she gestured towards the river. It was gone yesterday when I went back. Someone took it. Holloway sighed, the sound heavy with skepticism. Claire, Ronnie Driscoll lived in a world of half-truths and tall tales. He scavenged junk, sold scrap. That photo could have been anything, from any time. Finding it missing doesn't mean detective. A uniformed officer approached, holding an evidence bag. Inside was a small plastic object, washed clean by the river, but instantly recognizable. Claire's breath stopped. It was Danny's toy car, a tiny bright yellow Corvette. The one he'd carried everywhere in his coat pocket, the one missing from his backpack when it was found. Holloway took the bag, his expression shifting from weary skepticism to stunned disbelief. He held it up. This is Danny's? Claire could only nod, her throat clenched shut. She'd searched for that car for weeks after the disappearance, hoping it was a clue, a sign. It had simply vanished. It was in his pocket, the officer said, nodding towards the body bag being loaded into the van. Ronnie Driscoll's jacket pocket. The world tilted. The cold fury inside Claire froze solid, then shattered into a million razor-sharp shards. Ronnie? Had Ronnie had Danny's toy all these years? Was the fear in his eyes not for the grinning man, but guilt? Had the drifter, the town nuisance, been the monster right under their noses? Had he spun the grinning man tale to throw her off, to sound crazy? Was the lockbox, the tape, the note, was it all part of Ronnie's sick game? The implications crashed over her, a tidal wave of nausea and betrayal. Had she mourned for 17 years while the man who took her son drank himself stupid just blocks away? Had he watched her search? Had he laughed? Holloway was staring at the toy car, a hard light dawning in his eyes. This changes everything, Claire. This is evidence, direct connection. But Claire wasn't listening. The image of Ronnie's body, the sneaker on his table, the grinning note, it didn't fit. Ronnie was petty, weak, a thief,
Not patient, not ritualistic, not capable of the chilling calculation on that tape, the decades-long silence. And why leave the sneaker and the note after killing Danny? Why taunt her now? If Ronnie had the toy all along, why plant it on his own corpse? It made no sense. Unless he didn't plant it. The realization was colder than the river water. Ronnie wasn't the mastermind. He was another pawn, a witness silenced. And the toy car, a plant, a message. Not just. Claire turned away from the flashing lights, from Holloway's grim satisfaction, from the black bag holding the ruined shell of the only person who might have known the truth. The dawn light creeping over the river felt gray and hopeless. As she walked back towards her car, numb and adrift, her foot kicked something small and hard lying near the curb, half hidden in the damp grass. Instinct made her bend down. It was a matchbook. Soggy, the cover faded, but the printing was still legible. The rusty anchor pub. Flipping it open, the matches were ruined, but scrawled in faint pencil on the inside flap was an address. 77 Sycamore Lane. Her blood turned to ice. 77 Sycamore Lane. Her house. The matchbook hadn't been there when she arrived. It had been placed. Dropped. A breadcrumb. She looked up, scanning the gathering crowd of early morning onlookers. The police. The flashing lights. Anyone could be watching. Anyone. The librarian? A neighbor? The quiet man who always walked his dog at dusk? The grinning man wasn't a phantom. He was flesh and blood. He lived here. He knew where she lived. And he had just invited himself over. Claire crushed the matchbook in her fist, the cheap cardboard digging into her palm. The game wasn't over. Ronnie's death was a distraction, a sacrifice on the altar of the bridge. The real monster was still playing. And his next move was terrifyingly direct. He wasn't just watching. He was coming home. She drove back through the waking town. Every familiar street now a gauntlet of hidden eyes. Sycamore Lane unfolded before her, bathed in the deceptively soft morning light. The houses neat and quiet. Number 77 waited at the end, her sanctuary, now transformed into the bullseye on a target she couldn't see. The house looked back at her, its windows dark. The drive home was a blur of gray streets and jagged panic. Every parked car hit a watcher. Every curtained window felt like a staring eye. The matchbook, damp and crushed in her fist, was a brand Fortbark 77, Sycamore Lane. Her address, not just a location, but a declaration. I know where you live. I know where you sleep. Pulling into her driveway felt like entering a trap. The house, her refuge for 17 aching years, loomed with a new oppressive silence. The cheerful yellow paint seemed faded, the familiar lines of the porch warped with menace. She sat in the idling car, engine running, staring at the front door. Had he been inside? Was he still inside? Logic screamed at her to drive away, to call Holloway, to demand police presence. But the memory of Ronnie's bloated body, the planted toy car, the dismissive skepticism in Holloway's eyes, it choked her. They had their easy answer now, the dead drifter. They'd stop looking. They'd close the file marked Danny Whitmore, with Ronnie Driscoll's name scrawled across it in red. The grinning man would vanish back into the town's shadows, victorious. No, the silence rushed in, thick and watchful. She got out, the crunch of gravel under her boots unnaturally loud. Her keys felt slick in her trembling hand. She approached the door like a soldier breaching a minefield, every sense screaming. The lock turned smoothly. Too smoothly? She pushed the door open slowly, bracing for anything. The entryway was dim, untouched. The living room beyond orderly. No overturned furniture, no ransacked drawers, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The normalcy was somehow more terrifying than chaos. It meant he was careful, precise. He hadn't left a mess. He'd left a message, and the message was his unseen presence. She moved through the downstairs rooms, heart pounding against her ribs. Kitchen clean, dining room empty, living room undisturbed, the hollowed-out book on the shelf, the one hiding the cassette tape and the mutilated photograph, seemed untouched. A small, irrational relief. He hadn't taken those trophies back yet. Upstairs, her bedroom, Danny's old room preserved like a museum exhibit of lost childhood. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking up into the gloom of the second-floor landing.
The air felt colder up there, heavier. He sees you. The note's warning echoed. He sees you right now. Gripping the banister, she forced herself up, each step a minor eternity. The hallway stretched before her. Doors closed. Bathroom. Her room. Danny's room. The silence was absolute, pressing in on her eardrums. She strained to hear breathing, a floorboard settling, anything. She checked her room first. Bed neatly made. Closet closed. Nothing amiss. The bathroom was empty. The shower curtain pulled back decisively. Only Danny's room remained. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. This room was sacred ground, frozen in 1999. Posters of dinosaurs on the wall. Model planes hanging from the ceiling. The small bed still made with his Star Wars comforter. Opening this door always felt like tearing open a wound. Today it felt like stepping onto a crime scene that was still active. She turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. For a heart-stopping second, she thought she saw a shape sitting on the edge of the bed. But it was just the familiar lump of a stuffed bear propped against the pillows. Then she smelled it. Not the musty scent of a room long closed, but something sharp, acrid, and chillingly out of place. River water. The scent was faint but unmistakable. The dank organic smell of the riverbank, of mud and decaying reeds. It hung in the still air of the room. Her eyes darted wildly. Nothing looked disturbed. The model planes hung motionless. The books sat neatly on the shelf. The dinosaur posters stared back with vacant, prehistoric eyes. She took a step inside, her gaze sweeping the floor. The desk, the bed. The smell seemed stronger near the window. She walked towards it, her boots silent on the carpet. She pulled back the curtain, letting weak light flood in. Dust motes danced in the beam, nothing on the windowsill. Then she looked down. On the floor directly beneath the window lay a single wet brown leaf, the kind that grew in thick clusters by the riverbank. It was fresh, glistening slightly, a small puddle of murky water darkening the carpet beneath it. He hadn't ransacked the room. He hadn't taken anything tangible. He had simply been here. He had stood in her missing son's sanctuary, looking out the window, perhaps watching her drive away earlier. He had brought a piece of his domain, the river, the bridge, into hers, a violation so intimate it stole her breath. And he'd left the leaf, a calling card more eloquent than any note. I was here, in the heart of your grief. I walked where he walked. I breathed the air he breathed. A wave of nausea and impotent rage washed over her. She stumbled back, colliding with Danny's small desk. Something clattered to the floor. She looked down. It was Danny's old piggy bank, a cheerful blue ceramic pig. It had sat on that desk for years, untouched. It lay on its side now, the rubber plug that sealed its belly dislodged. Coins, pennies and nickels from 1999 spilled onto the carpet. But nestled among the dull coins, something else gleamed. A small silver locket, tarnished, heart-shaped, on a broken chain. It wasn't Danny's. Claire had never seen it before. Hands shaking violently, she picked it up. The metal was cold. With trembling fingers, she pried the tiny clasp open. Inside the locket, protected by the tarnished silver, were two tiny black and white photographs, faded almost beyond recognition. One showed a young boy, maybe 9 or 10, with dark, intense eyes and unruly hair falling over his forehead. The same boy from the back row of the 1963 reunion picnic photo, the boy who'd been staring intently at something outside the frame, the boy whose intense gaze had chilled her in the library. The other photograph showed a girl, younger, 7, maybe 8. Her smile was wide, innocent, but there was a haunting familiarity in her eyes. Claire knew that face. She'd seen it staring back from old newspaper clippings. Sarah Henley, the girl who vanished near the river in 1954. The locket snapped shut in her palm, the metal biting into her skin. The connection was no longer theoretical, no longer folklore. It was cold, hard metal in her hand. The grinning man wasn't just stealing children. He was collecting tokens, remembering, honoring, some twisted lineage that stretched back decades. He hadn't just been in Danny's room. He'd left an offering on an altar of grief, a relic from another victim, placed among her son's childhood treasures, a message written in stolen lives. The silence of the house shattered, not by sound but by the deafening roar of understanding. The grinning man wasn't merely a predator. He was a curator of sorrow.
And Claire, standing amidst her son's frozen childhood, holding the locket of a girl gone 60 years, was now part of his terrible collection. The hunt wasn't just for Danny anymore. It was for the dark thread connecting them all, a thread that led back to the boy with the dark, intense eyes, and forward into the suffocating silence of her own violated home. The river's secrets were bleeding onto her carpet, and the man who carried them was closer than her own shadow. The silver locket burned like dry ice in Claire's palm. Sarah Henley's faded, innocent smile. The dark-eyed boy from the reunion photo, the accused, the vanished. Proof. Tangible, horrifying proof stretching back decades, coiled like a serpent in her dead son's room. The scent of the river, dank, invasive, still hung in the air, mingling with the dust of preserved grief. He'd been here, touched Danny's things, left this cursed artifact among his treasures. A collector displaying his trophies, a predator marking his territory inside her deepest wound. Nausea warred with a terrifying crystalline clarity. Holloway had his easy answer. Ronnie, conveniently dead, conveniently carrying Danny's toy. Case closed. But this locket screamed the truth. A pattern etched in stolen childhoods, centered on the bridge, the river, the boy in the locket. The boy blamed for the 1958 accident. The boy who vanished. He walks among you still. The rasping voice on the tape slithered back. Was he the grinning man? Had the accused child become the adult monster, perpetuating the cycle born from his own torment, taking children because one was taken from him? Or was he just the first link in a chain of darkness? The locket felt heavy with implication. Why leave it now, after Ronnie's convenient death? After framing the drifter? It wasn't just a boast. It felt like an invitation, a challenge. You see the pattern? What will you do? The silence of the house pressed in, no longer empty, but charged with malevolent attention. He knew she'd find it. He wanted her to know the depth of the horror, the longevity of his game. He was showing her his roots, forcing her to acknowledge the ancient poison tree from which Danny's disappearance was just one bitter fruit. Claire closed her fist tightly around the locket, the tarnished edges biting into her skin. The cold metal seemed to pulse with a terrible energy. She looked out Danny's window, towards the distant, unseen river. The gray afternoon was bleeding into dusk. Holloway wouldn't listen. The police were satisfied. Ronnie's body was their closure. She was
Alone, utterly alone against something that moved through decades, like shadows through water. But she had the locket. She had the pattern. She had the location that bound it all together. The bridge. It always came back to the bridge. The grinning man had stepped out of the shadows, into her home, onto her son's grave. He'd shown her his collection. He'd framed his scapegoat. He thought he was untouchable. He thought she'd break. A cold, unfamiliar resolve solidified within her, hard as the locket in her grip. Fear didn't vanish. It was consumed by a darker, sharper fuel. Fury. Purpose. He wanted her to see. Fine. She would look. Not in dusty archives. Not in police reports. She would go to the source. To the altar where the cycle began and ended. To the riverbank. To the footbridge. Tonight, she pocketed the locket, its weight a cold anchor. The scent of the river in Danny's room was fading, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of her own determination. She walked out of the shrine to her lost boy, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt different now, not a sanctuary violated, but a command post. She needed a flashlight, sturdy boots, and a weapon. Anything. The game wasn't his anymore. He'd left the locket. He'd issued the challenge. Claire Whitmore was finally going to answer it. Down by the dark water, beneath the groaning wood, where the grinning man walked, where the river remembered everything. The beam of light pinned her like an insect. Claire froze, crouched amidst the relics of stolen childhoods. Danny's small, faded coat clutched to her chest. The cold mud of the tunnel floor seeped through her jeans. The stench of decay and stagnant water filled her nose, thick and suffocating. The light came from the tunnel entrance, back towards the riverbank shaft. It wasn't the weak, diffused glow of moonlight. It was harsh, focused, electric, deliberate. Her own flashlight, knocked from her grasp when she'd recoiled from Danny's voice, lay useless on the ground a few feet away, its beam illuminating a patch of wet brick wall and the skeletal roots of a tree pushing through the ceiling. This new light was different. It held her. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the adrenaline haze. The thought wasn't reasoned, it was primal certainty. The grinning man, the curator of this subterranean charnel house. He'd known she'd come, he'd led her here. The locket, the leaf, the voice through the pipes, it was all bait for the trap, and she'd walk straight in. She squeezed her eyes shut against the blinding beam, pressing Danny's coat against her face, inhaling the ghostly scent of detergent and little boy that somehow still lingered after 17 years beneath the earth. It was a desperate anchor. The voice, had it been real? Or just another sick trick played by the acoustics of the pipes and the madman holding the light? Hope warred with terror, a brutal clash in her chest. The light didn't move. It held her captive in its glare. She couldn't see who held it, only the blinding circle and the impenetrable darkness beyond its edges. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the relentless drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling, and the frantic hammering of her own heart. Was he savoring this? Watching her cower among his trophies, then cutting through the silence, impossibly close yet still echoing as if channeled through the ancient pipes snaking along the tunnel walls, came the whisper again. "Mom?" It was fainter this time, tinged with fear, confusion. The sound tore through her. Her eyes flew open, squinting against the light. "Danny?" Her own voice was a ragged croak swallowed by the oppressive gloom. "Danny, is that you? Where are you?" No answer, only the unwavering beam of light and the oppressive silence. Then the light moved, not towards her, not to reveal its holder. It swung deliberately away, sweeping across the offerings on the makeshift altar, the shoes, the ribbons, the broken toys. It lingered for a moment on Sarah Henley's locket, which Claire had dropped in her shock, its silver catching the glare. Then, with agonizing slowness, the beam began to retreat. It pulled back towards the tunnel entrance, shrinking the circle of illumination around her, plunging the shrine back into deeper shadow. He wasn't revealing himself. He was leaving, and he was taking the light with him. Darkness began to reclaim the tunnel, inch by inch. The beam became a receding eye, watching her as it withdrew. The message was clear. Follow. It was insanity. A descent into the predator's lair. He could be waiting just beyond the light, knife in hand. He could be leading her deeper into a maze of flooded passages, to drown her where no one would ever find her body. Another relic for his collection. Ronnie's bloated face flashed in her mind, but Danny's coat was rough against her cheek. His voice, whether real or cruel illusion, still echoed in the dripping silence. "Mom?" And the light was fading. The only path forward, or the only path out, was shrinking with every second. Claire's gaze darted to her own fallen flashlight. Could she reach it? Could she grab it and flee back up the shaft before the other light vanished completely? Before he vanished? But fleeing meant leaving the shrine, leaving Danny's coat, leaving the source of the voice. It meant surrender. It meant the grinning man won, vanishing back into the town's fabric with his secrets intact. The retreating beam was now a small, bright circle several yards down the tunnel, highlighting the wet bricks before it began to curve away. In moments it would be gone. A sob caught in Claire's throat, not of fear but of furious, desperate resolve. 17 years of empty rooms and fading posters. 17 years of the bridge groaning under her feet. 17 years of the river's dark, silent flow. It ended here. Tonight, in the mud and the dripping dark. She wouldn't flee back into the world of easy answers and closed files. Scrabbling in the mud, her fingers closed around the cold metal barrel of her own flashlight. She fumbled for the switch. Click. Its beam, weaker and yellower than the one retreating ahead, sprang to life, pushing back the encroaching darkness just a little. She surged to her feet, Danny's coat clutched tight in one hand, her flashlight held like a weapon in the other. Her boots slipped in the mud as she lunged forward, not towards the shaft leading up to the riverbank, but down the tunnel, towards the retreating light, towards the voice, towards the grinning man. "Danny!" she screamed, the sound raw and desperate, echoing off the wet walls. "I'm coming!" She ran, stumbling, splashing through unseen puddles, her beam jerking wildly, chasing the shrinking circle of light ahead as it rounded the bend in the tunnel and vanished from sight. The darkness rushed in behind her, swallowing the shrine and the ghosts of the lost children. There was only the tunnel, the receding light, the sound of her own ragged breath and pounding footsteps, and the chilling certainty that she was running straight into the grinning mouth of the abyss. The river flowed silently overhead,
holding its breath. The tunnel swallowed her. Claire ran, lungs burning, boots splashing through unseen icy puddles that soaked her to the knees. Her flashlight beam bounced erratically off the slick, moss-furred brick walls, a frantic yellow eye chasing the cold white circle ahead. It was always just vanishing around the next bend, receding like a will-o'-the-wisp, leading her deeper into the suffocating dark and the overwhelming stench of the river pressing down from above. Drip, 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 the only constant sound besides her own ragged gasps and the frantic slap of her footsteps. The voice hadn't come again. Had it ever been real? Or just the cruel acoustics of this dripping tomb, amplifying the grinning man's mockery? Danny's coat, clutched desperately against her chest, felt like the only anchor to reality, its faint preserved scent a talisman against the encroaching madness. The air grew colder, damper, the tunnel narrowed, the ceiling lowering, forcing her into a crouch. The brickwork became rougher, older, interspersed with crumbling stone and the gnarled fingers of tree roots punching through. The white light ahead paused, illuminating a sharp left turn, where the tunnel seemed to dead-end into a wall of darkness. Claire skidded to a halt, pressing herself flat against the clammy wall, heart hammering against her ribs. Her own light trembled in her hand. Was he waiting just around that corner? The silence stretched, thick and expectant. The white beam didn't move. It simply held the turn, a silent sentinel. Then, a new sound. Not a whisper, not dripping water. A low rhythmic clank, metal on metal, slow, deliberate. It came from beyond the turn, gripping Danny's coat tighter, the rough fabric digging into her palm. Claire edged forward. She rounded the corner, her flashlight beam stabbing ahead, merging with the harsh white light. It wasn't a dead end. The tunnel opened into a larger circular chamber, perhaps 10 feet across. The source of the white light was a powerful battery-powered lantern sitting on the wet stone floor, casting stark, elongated shadows. The air here was thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water, even stronger than before, and in the center of the chamber, illuminated by the combined lights, sat an object that stopped Claire's breath. It was a chair, an old rusted metal chair, like something salvaged from a derelict schoolhouse, bolted crudely to the stone floor. Restraints, thick leather straps, darkened with age and damp, hung limply from its arms and legs. The clank came again. A figure stood beside the chair, half turned away, fiddling with something metallic on the floor. A heavy padlock, its shackle open. He wore dark, water-stained trousers and rubber waders, a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up, shadowing his face. He moved with a stiff, deliberate slowness, utterly focused on the lock. Claire's beam fixed on him. Stop. The words scraped out, barely audible. The figure froze. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened up. He didn't turn immediately. He finished securing the padlock to a rusted ring set into the floor, the clank final and echoing. Then, with agonizing slowness, he turned to face her. The hood shadowed his upper face, but the lower half was visible in the harsh lantern light. A man, late 60s, maybe older. Deep lines carved from nose to mouth, thin lips pressed into a bloodless line, stubble gray and patchy on a gaunt jaw. It wasn't a face she recognized from town gossip or police bulletins. It was the face of quiet anonymity, the kind that fades into the background of hardware stores and library reading rooms. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her from under the hood's shadow, his posture unnervingly still. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick with the weight of decades. Heavy with the knowledge of the shrine just yards away, heavy with the unspeakable purpose of the chair. "Where is he?" Claire demanded, her voice gaining strength fueled by terror and fury. She took a step forward, her light unwavering on his face. "Where is Danny?" The man's head tilted slightly, bird-like. His gaze drifted past her shoulder, down the tunnel she'd come from. Then slowly it returned to her. His thin lips twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. A spasm. A reaction. He raised one hand, not in threat, but in a gesture that was almost instructive. He pointed a gnarled finger, not at her, but downwards, towards the wet stone floor near her feet. Claire's light followed. Embedded in the stone, barely visible beneath a thin layer of silt and water, was a heavy, rusted iron ring. A drain cover. It looked old, possibly original to whatever forgotten purpose this chamber once served. The rhythmic dripping sound seemed louder here,
It wasn't just from the ceiling. It was coming from the drain. The man lowered his hand. His silence was worse than any taunt. It was complicity. It was the quiet of the grave he curated. "He's not here," Claire whispered, the realization dawning like ice water in her veins. The shrine was a museum. The chair, was it preparation? For her? But Danny, the voice, the man under the hood tilted his head again, listening. Claire strained her ears. Beyond the dripping, beyond her own frantic pulse, she heard it. Faint, distant, muffled. Chimney tap, tap, tap. Not a voice. A rhythmic tapping. Metal on stone. Coming from below the drain cover. Understanding crashed over her, horrific and complete. The pipes. The voice she'd heard wasn't Danny speaking through the pipes. It was Danny in the pipes. Or rather below them, in whatever forgotten cistern, overflow chamber or flooded cellar this drain led to, trapped for 17 years, tapping, calling, waiting. The grinning man hadn't kept children. He'd buried them alive in the river's dark veins. The man moved, not towards her. He took a slow, shuffling step backwards, towards a darker recess in the chamber wall. Claire hadn't noticed. Another tunnel mouth, narrower, sloping downwards, swallowed by utter blackness. "No!" Claire screamed, lunging forward, not towards the man but towards the drain cover. She dropped to her knees, Danny's coat falling forgotten into the muck. She clawed at the iron ring, fingers scrabbling on the cold, slimy metal. It was immovable, fused to the stone by decades of rust and sediment. "Danny, I'm here, I'm here." Tap, tap, tap. The sound was slightly faster now, frantic. The shuffling footsteps stopped. Claire looked up, flashlight beam swinging wildly. The man stood at the entrance to the downward-sloping tunnel, half turned back. The harsh lantern light caught the lower part of his face again. And this time, as he looked at her kneeling in the filth, clawing at the unyielding iron, his thin lips did stretch, slowly, deliberately, into a wide, terrible rictus. It wasn't joy. It wasn't cruelty. It was the grin of absolute desolate emptiness. The grin of the river itself. The grinning man. Then he turned and shuffled into the descending darkness, leaving the lantern blazing on the floor, illuminating the rusted chair, the drain cover, and Claire Whitmore on her knees in the freezing muck, her son's desperate tapping the only sound in the world besides the river's eternal, indifferent flow overhead. The chase was over. The monster had shown her the heart of his darkness, the depth of her son's living tomb, and then he had simply walked away, vanishing into the labyrinth beneath the town, carrying the unspeakable weight of his secret with him. The truth was worse than any ghost story. It was cold iron, muffled taps, and the echoing silence after a grin faded into the dark.